It's 4 in the afternoon on Wednesday, September 24th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Let's begin with President Park Geun-hye's address to more than 100 world leaders at the UN Climate Summit in New York. The president said, why not see climate change as an opportunity rather than as a burden? She then also promised more input from Korea. Choi You-sun has our top story.
President Park Geun-hye has called on the international community to face up to one of the greatest challenges of our time, climate change. Addressing the UN Climate Summit, a high-level gathering to catalyze a global action plan on curbing carbon emissions by next year, the Korean president said the world should consider climate action as an opportunity, not a burden.
How we view the climate agenda as boon or bane will bring huge differences. Investing in the chance to unlock new energy industries and jobs can ignite fresh engines of future growth.
President Park said her government is seeking to nurture new energy industries in dealing with climate change, such as energy storage systems for non-stop supply, zero-energy buildings, and self-sufficient eco-friendly towns. To encourage the private sector to innovate in reducing emissions, the president said the market should reward them for their work. For everyone to participate in the global campaign, President Park said the developed world must assist their developing counterparts by sharing the required technology and know-how.
All countries need to do their share if we are to limit global warming to 2 degrees by this century's end. Korea will work to submit next year our plan to support the post-2020 climate regime.
The Korean leader then said Seoul will contribute up to $100 million to the Korea-based Green Climate Fund, established to aid the developing nations on top of the $50 million it's currently paying. Pledging to share Korea's own knowledge and experiences internationally, President Park announced her country will become the first in Asia to implement an emission trading scheme next year. Choi You-sun, ARIRANG News, New York.
And on the sidelines of the summit, President Park held bilateral talks with global leaders. In talks with Spain's King Felipe VI, she suggested teaming up to expand their economic presence in the South American market, taking advantage of Korea's free trade deals on the continent and Spain's cultural similarities. And during talks with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the Korean leader asked for the safety of Koreans be ensured in Egypt in the wake of recent terror attacks in the region. Meanwhile, meeting with the leader of Uganda, President Park asked for Korean firms be given a chance to participate in infrastructure projects in the African country. And going back to President Park's message on tackling global climate change, the heads of states from around the world agreed with her message. Leaders, including U.S. President Barack Obama, highlighted the need to start dealing with the issue now rather than later. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
With the threat of Islamic State militants and the spread of Ebola in West Africa competing for attention, the United Nations is also setting its sights on climate change. The UN has given 125 countries and their representatives at the General Assembly a platform to explain their plans to address the problem. U.S. President Barack Obama stressed the need for emerging economies to make stronger commitments and move past the rich-poor divide that has created a barrier in UN negotiations.
And today I call on all countries to join us, not next year or the year after that, but right now. Because no nation can meet this global threat alone.
Before taking the podium, Obama met with China's Vice Premier Zhang Gaoli. The two agreed that both of their countries needed to take more responsibility in the fight against climate change, as they represent the world's 2 biggest greenhouse gas emitters. Zhang said China would aim to cap emissions as soon as possible. British Prime Minister David Cameron said his country is aiming to cut down greenhouse emissions by 80% by the year 2050, and to push the European Union to target a 40% reduction by 2030. French President François Hollande said his country will inject $1 billion into the Green Climate Fund. Most other leaders did not disclose specific plans. choosing instead to unveil them closer to the start of the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris in December of 2015. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And taking place on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly was a meeting over North Korea's human rights violations. Officials from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo pointed to the atrocious abuses taking place under the regime and urged Pyongyang to close down prison camps. Here's our Hwang Sung-hee with more.
The UN Commission of Inquiry says North Korea uses prison camps, systematic oppression, and arbitrary executions against its own citizens, practices that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says hold no place in the 21st century.
So we say to the North Korean government, all of us here today, you should close those camps. You should shut this evil system down.
Kerry hosted the first ever ministers' meeting on North Korean human rights Tuesday to draw attention to the findings of a UN report released in February. It estimates that some 120,000 political prisoners are currently being held in 4 major labor camps, where starvation, torture, and forced abortions are rampant. South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se hopes for further progress on the issue.
Later this year, I look forward to the General Assembly adopting a more robust resolution on this issue, including measures on accountability.
Yoon proposed discussing the issue with the North, an offer that will likely be rejected. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un claims his people enjoy the world's most advantageous human rights system, but the diplomatic pressure on Pyongyang is mounting.
Japan is determined to play an active role to ensure that these efforts will lead North Korea to take concrete action toward resolving human rights abuses in North Korea.
Human rights watchers say coordination with Pyongyang's chief ally China is needed to some extent, which remains a challenge. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
The lack of human rights is not the only apparent concern in the North. Many are reportedly suffering from a lack of the most basic necessities, especially food. The World Food Program says the average daily portion of food distributed to North Koreans was at 250 grams in August. Now, this is the lowest amount provided in 3 years, and it's not even half the amount North Korean authorities have set as a goal, which is just shy of 600 grams. The WFP says this month's daily food ration is similar to last month's, adding that the food shortage is due to a drought from the spring. Over in the Middle East, U.S. military leaders say the first round of airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Syria is only the start of their campaign. President Obama says the support given by at least 5 Arab nations in those airstrikes proves that the world is committed to destroying the terrorist threat. Our Connie Kim has more.
Speaking out after the first airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Syria, U.S. President Barack Obama said that Washington was proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with its Arab allies. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Bahrain, and Qatar have partnered up with Washington for the first time since the first Gulf War in 1991 to counter the growing threat.
Well, it is a wonderful opportunity for me to welcome these leaders, friends, partners from the region, and to say thank you to all of them for their participation and commitment to rolling back the violent extremism that has so disrupted Iraq and Syria and threatens the region as a whole.
More than 200 airstrikes were launched against a dozen targets in the offensive, much of it in or around the Islamic State's self-declared capital of Raqqa. Activists on the ground said some 70 IS militants and 50 al-Qaeda-linked fighters were killed in the first set of strikes Tuesday. The offensive in Syria is an expansion of a campaign that began in Iraq last month. Prior to the airstrikes on IS targets, the U.S. launched separate airstrikes on a group of senior al-Qaeda officials known as the Khorasan Group in Syria. U.S. officials say they were plotting attacks against the West and had established a safe haven west of the city of Aleppo. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
On to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. A new report by a U.S. health agency says the number of Ebola cases could dramatically soar in the coming months to up to 1.4 million in Liberia and Sierra Leone alone. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said the estimate is partly based on the premise that Ebola cases are vastly underreported. It believes there could be up to 21,000 reported and unreported cases in those two countries by the end of this month. The World Health Organization says there are an estimated 5,800 infections and over 2,800 deaths in West Africa. It's become a bit usual for Koreans to look for jobs after retirement for economic reasons. But finding a job in your golden years is no easy task, and that's why the government has introduced new measures intended to lend a helping hand. Our Hwang Ji-hye tells us more.
The elderly line up for a job fair. They're mostly people in their 40s, 50s, or 60s who are approaching retirement or already have. What they all hope for is finding employment again.
I prefer managerial positions, although I've been working at a bank for a long period of time. I'm very confident in human resources and financial affairs.
With the life expectancy now exceeding 80 years, workers hope to retire at age 72. In reality, though, most of them are forced into retirement by their companies when they're in their mid-50s. Around 70% of retirees either start up their own businesses or end up as day laborers. But of all new enterprises, nearly two-thirds fail within 3 years. Improving those numbers, the finance minister says, is crucial to boosting private spending.
Improving business conditions for the self-employed is the key to improving the people's livelihoods.
The government has pledged to help. It plans to provide job training programs so the elderly can better prepare for life after retirement. The training program will include designing a career path for people over the age of 50. The government believes this will help prevent many from moving to self-funded ventures without any training. The government also plans to expand subsidies by around $2,000 a year for companies that introduce work-share programs. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
In the meantime, Korea's real wage growth rate has plunged to its lowest level in 2.5 years to near zero. The central bank and labor ministry say real wages at companies with 5 or more full-time workers stood at about $2,700 per month on average in the second quarter of this year. That's only a 0.2% increase on year. Analysts attribute the sluggish growth to companies slashing bonuses and the rising number of low-paid temporary workers in the country. The government is looking into giving domestic manufacturers a few more reasons to bring their overseas plants back home. The Trade Ministry says it will submit a revision to the law on the country's free trade zones that gives companies returning to Korea easier access. Korea currently has 13 designated free trade zones which provide firms various benefits such as tax breaks. Now, about 60 local companies have reportedly agreed to bring their production facilities back since 2012, while a dozen others have committed to doing the same over the next 4 years. Nearly $60 billion has been wiped off the market value of Samsung Electronics since January last year, with the company's stock prices recently at a 2-year low. Based on their closing price on Tuesday, the Korea Exchange says the market value stands at some $165 billion. That's down from January of 2013, when Samsung's stock hit an all-time high. The stock price hovered at around the $1,100 level on Tuesday, the lowest since July 2012. Analysts say a lower profit forecast for Samsung in the third quarter, coupled with the company's excessive inventory, have turned investors off. Now, in other news, there was and still is strong opposition from some doctors and civic groups, but the government is pushing ahead with telemedical services this month as originally planned. It will first test the waters with a pilot program to see whether the system is effective. Our Kim Ji-yeon has this next report.
This patient has been suffering from high blood pressure for 15 years now and requires continuous medical examinations and care. But instead of visiting the hospital every day, he sends his health-related data, such as blood pressure and body composition, from his personal computer at home. Then the patient calls his doctor for one-on-one treatment.
마지막으로 병원 다녀오신 지는 언제세요?
한 일주일이요?
네.
The government is testing this telemedical service on 1,200 patients at 11 medical centers across Korea. The health ministry expects that around 8.5 million people nationwide will benefit.
Patients that are in remote regions, such as islands and mountainous locations, are expected to benefit the most, as well as patients with chronic diseases that require continuous monitoring other physical conditions.
Through a special transmitter device, patients send health information to their doctor on a daily basis or a few times a week, depending on their condition. The doctor assesses the data received and consults with the patient at least once a week. Only when the patient asks for an alteration in their medication or when their condition worsens will they be required to make a physical visit to the closest medical center. The pilot program, which begins this month and runs until March of next year, will be reviewed and evaluated along the way by a committee composed of medical and IT experts. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Bringing you the fresh updates from stories breaking in Korea and abroad. We give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Join Laah Hyun-kyung live from Seoul. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
The Korean film industry is becoming more diverse than ever. There are a growing number of independent movies that are grabbing the audience's attention. Our Shin Se-min reports on one such indie movie that has made waves at film festivals around the world.
The life of an ordinary 70-year-old woman who's traveled a rough road growing up in the tranquil city of Suncheon in Korea's South Jeollanam-do province, the documentary, Splendid But Sad Days, invites audiences to her story as a wife, a mother, and a fisherwoman who's devoted her whole life to support her family. This independent film had its premiere on the silver screen in Seoul on Tuesday for eager audience members who've been waiting for their chance to see the film. The 64-minute documentary has been highly praised by international audiences throughout the film festival circuit, including the Busan International Film Festival, Focus Korea of France, and the Montreal World Film Festival.
International audiences commented on the film's ability to capture the unfiltered life of a woman who gave up everything for her family. It also shows aspects of Korea's traditional culture. I'm glad the film was able to present this side of Korea.
Cinemagoers are saying that independent films like this have more of an effect on them compared to commercial hits.
I think the film will linger in my mind for days. It made me want to search for more independent films that can touch my emotions like this.
While the local documentary scene is small, the genre is growing. The independent film Old Partner, released in 2008, posted ticket sales of over 2.9 million. Splendid But Sad Days will be shown in selected theaters starting in Suncheon from Thursday. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
So we are already into day 5 of the Asian Games in Incheon, which got off to a gloomy start weather-wise, but Korean athletes have brightened things up with some golden finishes. So let's go over to ARIRANG's Song Ji-sun at the News Center for an update. So Ji-sun, I hear it's been quite a day for women's shooting.
You're right, Hyun-kyung. Korea's female shooters grabbed a team gold and an individual bronze in the women's 50-meter rifle prone event this morning. The trio of Laah Hyun-kyung, Eun-bin-na, and Chung Mi put together 1,855.5 points to take the gold, with just 1.4 points separating the Korean team and runner-up China. 23-year-old Eun won a bronze medal of her own in the individual round after shooting 620.6 points, which was 3.5 points behind winner Narantuya Chulunbadrak of Mongolia. Malaysia's Nur Suryani binti Mohammed Taibi actually finished with the same amount of points as but earned a silver since she had a higher score in the final series. Is currently playing for the Korean Army team, and in fact she volunteered for the military duty and said she will continue to serve. The Incheon Asian Games are her very first major international competition. And over on the piste, Korean fencers have landed in the final women's team foil after easily beating Japan 45-29. Korea will face off against China, who beat Hong Kong 45-21 in the semis in the morning. Korea's women fencers have won this event in 4 consecutive Asian Games dating back to the 1998 Bangkok Games. Among the 4 fencers taking part in Incheon, ace Nam Hyun-hee has earned gold medals in the past 3 Asian Games in the team event, and Chun Hee-suk is seeking a second gold in Incheon after winning the individual event. The final team match with China starts at 6 p.m. Wednesday evening.
Now, Ji-sun, what many Korean fans have their eyes on is the baseball games, though. The preliminary round is set to start tonight, and Team Korea is scheduled to play its second game this time against Chinese Taipei, correct?
Right, it will go as scheduled because the Korean peninsula, which was under the influence of Typhoon Fong-wang, there was a chance the game might be called even before the first pitch, but as the rain has subsided and is currently only cloudy in the host city, all games are set to start as scheduled. If tonight's game against Chinese Taipei happens to be postponed, it will be rescheduled for Friday, just a day before the semifinals, meaning the Korean baseball team would have to play games on 4 consecutive days without a day of rest in between. The weather clearing up has eased a bit of burden on manager Lee Jung-il, as he might have had to reshuffle his starters. Although the starting lineup hasn't been released yet, the earlier announced Gia Tigers starting pitcher Laah Hyun-kyung will take the mound tonight.
Right, so if the rain does return, what happens then?
Well, before the typhoon arrived, the organizing committee did announce its plans before this rain. Sports like football, beach volleyball, archery, and hockey will go as planned unless conditions like lightning or heavy rain pose a hazard to the athletes. On the other hand, cycling races cannot proceed as the velodrome, which does not have a roof, would prove too dangerous in the rain.
So we'll have to wait and see whether the weather conditions will allow those games to take place or not. And many thanks, Ji-sun, for the updates.
I'll see you back at the early edition.
Good afternoon, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. It's been a rainy day here in Korea due to the influence of Typhoon Fong-wang, which is passing through, and this rain will hang until the evening except in the central region where it already has cleared up. And due to the rain and clouds, temperatures have dropped, putting into the highs down in the high teens to the mid-20s. Now, this rain is going to stick around until tomorrow with a total of up to 80 millimeters expected in the Gyeongsang-do provinces, with heavy rain advisories in effect, and less than 5 millimeters are expected in Seoul and the surrounding regions. Now, as for the weather conditions in Incheon, where the Asian Games are being held, the rain has cleared, and with the temperatures currently standing at a cool of 21 degrees. Now going over to our temperature readings for today, Seoul will top out at 20 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan is a bit higher at 24 and 25 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island is at 26, while Dokdo hits 19, while Mount Kumgang is slightly lower at 18 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Hyun-kyung.
All right, thank you, Michelle. That brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back with more at 6 p.m. Korea time.